following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, in the northern part of what I consider to be tied for the greatest state in the Union, tied with New York. But I've got a host of folks right here who will argue the case. George Case, speaking of cases, what's your favorite state?
Hey, my favorite state is the state of Maine, where we go every summer.
Okay. How Bock Jr.? How Bock Jr.? How Bock? Harold Bock.
Al Bock. My favorite state is where I live, New York, New York.
Okay. And I'm guessing that David Hubler's favorite state is the state of the Bronx.
No. Once upon a time, perhaps. But, that's a good question. I really don't know. I do love New Hampshire, having gone to school there. And I really like Virginia, as it's turning bluer and bluer every election cycle. So,
thank God in this case. We just escaped the bullet with this election. But we're not going to talk politics tonight.
No. You missed me, Al.
I got it.
Wow, you missed me.
I did. I got to ask Alan Blumkin, your favorite state. I'm guessing it's Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and also the state of confusion.
Boy, welcome to. I could be mayor. I could be governor. But let's start it off. Got to start it off talking Henry Aaron. What did Henry Aaron mean to you guys? Briefly, Alan Blumkin first.
Henry Aaron was a great ball player and a greater person. He handled everything with dignity and grace, even with all those idiotic insults during the chase to Babe Ruth. And one of the things about Henry Aaron, like Stan Musial, is nobody ever had a bad word for him.
Right.
He was a total class act, and even though he was 86, by the way, his birthday is February 5th. He was 86. It still hurt. I mean, with all these Hall of Famers going since K-Line last year, it's just been absolutely terrible.
Yes.
It hit me very hard because I remember Henry Aaron, when it came up in 1954, he came up from Class A and replaced Bobby Thompson, who had broken his ankle in spring training. It's a very, very sad day.
Yeah. It has been a sad year. How about that? 11 Hall of Famers since last year are gone. And each one of them are missed in their own way. But everybody will miss and Mrs. Henry Aaron forever. George Case III, Henry Aaron.
Well, I have to agree with Alan. I mean, he was a sensational ball player, but he was even a better person. And I have a small connection to Henry Aaron, and that's Al Downing, my good friend who we've had on our podcast. Al, served up number 715. Always handled it with class. Said, hey, somebody was going to give up 715, and it just happened to be him. But Henry and Al Downing became very good friends, and people were saying, well, maybe Downing grooved one. Well, if you look at the tape of 715, the first pitch, Al threw to Aaron, it bounced in the dirt. and the second one he got a fastball up, and Hank put it out. So, I agree with Alan, and I know Hal. I'm sure David. I mean, his stature as a ball player, Henry Aaron, is unparalleled in my opinion. And I think all of us are better for knowing him and knowing of him and watching him play. He's just a sensational ball player and a wonderful human being.
Well, David Hubler, please.
Yeah, of course, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I mean, it's all superlatives when it comes to Henry Aaron. But I do have a little story. I was doing a piece for Voice of America, and I forget the exact circumstances, but it had to do something with Atlanta and Henry Aaron. And we had a stringer down there in Atlanta, and I called him and I gave him the assignment to go do this interview with Henry Aaron, which had been agreed to. And this stringer said to me, "Who's Henry Aaron?" So I knew it was going to be an unusual interview. I had to actually prep him with questions. This guy didn't know anything about Henry Aaron or baseball. It reminded me also of the time I was speaking to this young kid who was a keen basketball player, and he followed the NBA. And at one point I mentioned Bob Pettit, and he said, "Who's Bob Pettit?"
Right. No, that's the way, David, you know what? That's the way sports are. I mean, you have a few players like, Ruth and Gehrig and DiMaggio, Mantle, I mean, that transcend that generations. But, the younger generation, 20 years from now, you ask them about Henry Aaron, and they'll probably not know who you're talking about. So, I mean, I can understand that about Pettit.
I disagree with George.
Well, you know what, Ralph, it's hard to say because, just like David said, I talk to people about NBA basketball, and you mentioned a guy named Bob Pettit, one of the greatest, and yet I've had the same reaction, say, who's Bob Pettit? And I remember there was a story, and I don't know who the player was, but somebody was asking a major league player about 20 years ago, tell me what you know about Jackie Robinson. The guy said, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
Vince Coleman. Vince Coleman.
Is that who it was, Alan? Okay, I didn't know who it was, but I mean, to me, that just stunned me because all the accolades and what Jackie did, and here's a major league ball player who should be thanking Jackie Robinson. Instead, he says he didn't know anything about him.
And he probably wasn't the only one either.
Right. Yep.
Well, I can chime in on that. This is Hal.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are a couple of things I want to say. First of all, Henry Aaron was the most decent person to deal with that I can remember in baseball. I mean, he was always available. He was always genial. He was just a pleasant guy to deal with. I'll tell you a couple of stories. When I started, after I retired, I taught at Long Island University for 7 years. I taught sports writing. And I was fired up when I got there. I really was. I was going to save journalism. And in my first class, I got up there and I thought, well, how am I going to approach this? I'll approach this by telling some anecdotes. And I told an anecdote about Billy Martin, who was in the middle of his George Steinbrenner years at that point. And I was about halfway through this anecdote, and one of the young ladies in the back of the room raised her hand, and I said, yeah, can I help? And she said, who's Billy Martin? And I thought, well, I'm in trouble here. If they don't know the names that I'm throwing around here, that's going to be a problem. I had the same experience. I had a similar experience in the library. I gave my kids, and I should tell you that LIU is a mostly a minority population, student population. So I decided one of my assignments was going to be to write a story about Jackie Robinson's first year in Brooklyn because of what he went through as a black ball player, the first black ball player. And I went to the library, to arrange for a room for my kids to be in and for reference materials. I went up to the librarian. This is the librarian at a university, right? And I said, I explained who I was and how I wanted to have my kids do a project on Jackie Robinson. And the librarian looked at me and said, "Who's Jackie Robinson?"
Oh.
So, these things go on all the time. Certainly in my life, apparently. I don't know.
Well, that shocks me that a librarian wouldn't have a better knowledge of American history, because
I certainly think so, wouldn't you?
You wouldn't have to be a baseball fan to recognize the significance of Robinson's accomplishment.
The interesting part of that is I'm writing a column. I was writing a column today, and I'll probably finish it tomorrow. The Super Bowl is coming up. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but the Super Bowl is coming up, and
very much
Tom Brady is going to be in the Super Bowl. And I keep hearing him described as GOAT, the greatest of all time. The greatest of all time? All time is a long time. Have you ever heard of Slingin' Sammy Baugh or Sid Luckman or Otto Graham? And there were some pretty good quarterbacks before Tom Brady was born. So, things like that bother me a lot. There's a lack of appreciation of history, I think, in the country, frankly, and certainly among the younger generation. So that troubles me, and that's why I'm writing about this today.
Okay. I will say Brody's 10 Super Bowls. Wow. Brady's 10 Super Bowls.
Let me interrupt you for a second. He played for the New England Patriots, who played in the American Football Conference's East Division. And the other teams in that division were the woebegone New York Jets, the woebegone Miami Dolphins, and the woebegone Buffalo Bills. So he had a free ticket into the playoffs, almost a free ticket into the playoffs, and often had a bye in the playoffs. So he'd have to win a lot of games to get to the Super Bowl. Now, did he win the Super Bowl? Well, he won, I think, 6 of them, which is pretty good, but he also lost 3 of them. And I would point out to you that Terry Bradshaw played in 4 Super Bowls and won them all. Joe Montana played in 4 Super Bowls, and he won them all. So please don't tell me that Tom Brady is the greatest of all time. He's a hell of a player. There's no question about that. But the greatest of all time is a long time.
Okay.
How?
I'm here. What?
I think one of the big factors is television. Because in the old days, you never saw Sid Luckman or Sammy Baugh or Otto Graham.
That's true.
Okay, so
you know what?
Brady they see every week. They've been seeing him every week for 20 years.
You know what? I wasn't around when Abraham Lincoln was president, but I knew he was a hell of a president because I picked up a book now and then, I mean,
well, the one name. I'm sorry. The one name we forgot is Johnny Unitas, who was
another one.
For many years was considered the greatest of all quarterbacks.
That's right.
So I just threw that in.
Yeah, that's a good one. And you might throw in the 49ers quarterback as well, who was damn good.
Which one?
The first and the second one.
Wyatt Tittle and
no,
John Brody.
That would be the second and third one.
Keep going, Ralph.
All right. Well, we'll go on to Larry King, the late Larry King. How did that affect you guys? It affected me terribly. Maybe given my age, given that I'm an all-night person, and that he had an all-night show, seemingly took over for Long John Neville in my mind. An interesting show, informative, and a lot of sports, a lot of baseball. Larry King was a Dodger fan, Brooklyn growing up, and he had a lot of stories. Let's keep it in order. Alan Blumkin first. Larry King.
It doesn't affect me at all because I never watched them.
Okay. Boy, I got a lot of fill for that. I get going right on to George Case.
Well, I give my little talk about Larry King. I mean, I grew up watching him too, and Ralph, you and Larry King sound a lot alike. You got that accent, so I think he was a terrific interviewer. I mean, he really brought out a lot of interesting comments from people, and people wanted to be on his show, and I think he was a legendary broadcaster, and also. Larry seemed to be the same kind of person, even though he was suffering a lot of physical problems. I think he had lung cancer. I think he died of COVID. I think he had several heart attacks. So, he had a very long and interesting life, but he had a lot of physical problems as well.
He also had a lot of problems, matrimonial problems. I think he was married like 7 times.
Yeah, I was going to say he was married 7 or 8 times, I think, Ralph. You're absolutely right. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, he did. He married quite often.
Problem. That may have helped his health problems. You never know.
Yes, absolutely. Or it might have made him strong enough to recover from his health problems.
That's possible too. He was a great interviewer, and the reason he was a great interviewer is that he was interested in what his person that he was talking to had to say. He asked interesting questions and listened to the answers. And so often, people in today's media are interested in hearing their own voices and not particularly interested in what the response to their question is. He always seemed to be interested in the response, and that made him a great interviewer.
Yeah, I agree with that, Hal. He was. I absolutely agree. A lot of times you'll see the so-called talking heads on television, and they want to get their 5 minutes of fame, and they'll be talking, and the person that they're interviewed barely is able to say a word.
That's correct.
Hey, before I get to David Hubler, I just want to throw in one bit of my 2 cents. Larry King, if he had an author on to talk about his book, would specifically, intentionally not read the book before the interview. And most, which is against what most people say you should do, his idea was to ask questions as if the audience who hadn't read the book was going to ask. And it was just a different style. And it take 50% of one, 50% of the other. I think it makes for a more interesting interview on some respects if you leave it to the author to talk about it with no prejudgments. But that's.
I'm glad you meant. Yeah, you were gonna call on me next, and I'm glad you waited. You waited till you told me that little anecdote because I didn't know it, and frankly, I did not like Larry King one bit, and now I like him even less because I interviewed a hell of a lot of authors when I was book editor at VOA. I mean, I had loads of people, famous and not so famous, come in, and there wasn't one case when I did not read their book before they came in for an interview. Actually, I take that back. In one case, I did not, and I had to improvise. And believe me, it's the worst thing in the world when you're talking to a person who's just written a book and the man who's asking you questions knows nothing about the book. If Larry King did that, it was another reason why I disliked him. I thought he was a complete phony. And I thought that from the time that Larry King early in his career wound up in a pokey, and he's been able to sort of whitewash that whole incident There were two variations on the story. One I just read the other day as part of his obit. But years ago, I remember reading about how Larry King had worked for the Miami Dolphins. And he got involved in some land scheme. Florida land schemes are pretty common. And he wound up, according to this one story, he actually was convicted and wound up in jail for a bit. The other story is that it was not a land deal, that he embezzled some money that they had collected for some kind of fund, and he used it for his own personal gain. The guy whose money he embezzled took him to court, and it was a big brouhaha. Anyway, whichever the story is correct, King has been made to whitewash this out of his entire biography. Doesn't appear. You have to really dig deeply or remember things, crazy things like I do, and remember that. So from that time on, when I heard that story about because he was plugging this land in the swamps of Florida to sell, and that was the first story I heard. So I don't. And if he didn't read the books of the authors, he was shortchanging the authors, because there's an awful lot in those books, regardless of who it is. I had in what was his name? That crazy health nut. He used to wear little short shorts and.
Richard Simmons.
Richard Simmons, thank you. I had Richard Simmons in, and I even read his dumb book before I did the interview, as he flitted around the studio in his little shorts.
Okay. Hey, while I have you and we're on the subject...
What a word picture that is.
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was.
The visualization just keeps me soft, and will for the rest of my life, I'm afraid. I have a question for David Hubler. What's your beef with Mr. Costas? You have always talked about him negatively. You don't like him.
No, I do not.
Why?
Because he talks too much. There's never a scintilla of trivia with excuses here to Alan that he does not know and does not manage to broadcast at least 2 or 3 times in each pro. He repeats himself. He likes to hear himself talk, and it's endless. He just never shuts up. I turn the sound off when he comes on.
Okay. To each his own, because I like him.
All right.
I liked him even more this week. He gave a great obituary for Henry Aaron on CNN, and thought the combination of that was great.
I think, you know what, Ralph, when you're talking, and David, you're talking about Bob Costas, I think, it's been a while, but I think he gave the eulogy at Mickey Mantle's funeral.
Yeah,
yes,
he did. I think, yeah, he did. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he was one of those guys that you knew he was a fan as a kid, and he carried Mickey Mantle's baseball card with him since he was 12 years old. So he was a little schmaltzy, but
yeah.
I liked him a lot.
Okay.
To you,
well,
Mr. Bock.
We have we're fortunate here in New York with the Mets to have 3 really good broadcasters. 2 of them ex-ball players, Ron Darling and Keith Hernandez, and the third one is the play-by-play guy, who's Gary Cohn. And I just think they carry the telecast so well. I'll watch Met games because I'm a Mets fan, and I have some curiosity about what trouble they'll get themselves into in this particular game. But I must tell you that Gary Cohn and Keith Hernandez and Ron Darling are the gold standard of baseball broadcasters.
Well, Ron Darling really improved over the years. Because I remember him when he first came on the air, and he wasn't particularly good, but he has really, really turned it around. He is a very fine color man, yes.
And
they give you a lot of insight. The three of them give you a lot of insight to what's going on the field, which isn't always pleasant for the Mets. But there's a lot of you learn a lot of baseball knowledge, baseball strategy, just inside stuff, and
right.
I appreciate it as a listener. I really do.
Yeah. You see, when Darling started out, he did like a lot of these color guys do. They tell you what you've just seen. Well, he chased the ball to the left field wall, and then he turned and pivoted, and he threw it down. And you just saw this. That's not what you want to hear. You want to know why he was playing in the position he was, or why was he out of position. Those are the kind of things that are real insights, not just repeating what we've all seen on TV. But Darling is much, much better now, much better.
Yeah. I want to put in a good word for Howie Rose on the radio. Radio is much more difficult, and I listen to it a lot. And through the MLB thing on the internet, and he is really good and incredibly knowledgeable about Met history. So,
Howie and Gary Cohen both grew up as Met fans sitting in the upper deck at Shea Stadium. So
right.
they are well versed on the history of that ball club. And Howie is a terrific broadcaster. For a long time, only within the last couple of years as he stopped, he was doing Islander games as well as Met games. So he would go from one season right into the other season. And that's not an easy thing to do. You need some time off sometimes. But Howie managed it very well.
They told Gene Conley the same thing. Not an easy...
Marty Glickman. Marty Glickman was a pro at that. Another great New Yorker who was an announcer and a former Olympian.
Well, Marty's broadcast tree had a lot of branches, and a lot of the legendary broadcasters here in New York learned their craft from Marty Glickman. The most famous that I know is a guy I did a book with many years ago, Marv Albert. Marv Albert learned at Marty's knee. So, Marty helped a lot of these guys out.
Yeah. And guys from all over the country, NBC affiliates, they bring in guys from all over to learn from Marty. He had a way of... He's a good teacher. You must have been too, Hal. Did you enjoy it as much as sports writing?
Enjoy Marty, you mean?
Teaching. No, teaching.
Oh, teaching. Oh.
Yeah.
Teaching was fun. I did enjoy teaching. Sports writing will always be first in my heart because I did it all my life. For 40 years I did it at the AP. But I had a good time teaching. I would have preferred that the student population be more involved and more, better students, but they were who they were, and I did the best I could with them. But I had a good time, yeah.
Did anybody make it or advance to something in the industry that you kept in touch with? Any of your...
I had a kid. He's a kid. He was an older guy returning to school who was from the islands, and he had played basketball against, not David Robinson, Tim... come on, help me
Duncan.
out. David Robinson's...
Tim Duncan.
Tim Duncan, that's right. He had played ball against Tim Duncan in high school, and he came back to school after doing whatever he was doing, and he got a job with the New York Giants football club in the front office as a PR person. He was, to me, the most successful. I had a couple others, one kid went to work at NBC, another kid went to work at CBS, so I had some kids who were successful, but by and large, I like to say that these kids came to Long Island University because it was cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Everybody has to be someplace,
I hope you didn't tell them that.
No, I didn't. No.
Yeah, I get very. My tolerance as I've gotten older for announcers has gone down quite a bit. I was watching the Buffalo-Kansas City football game the other day, and Tony Romo, who is the main color man on CBS Pro Football telecast, he never shuts up.
Okay.
But the two I couldn't stand most were Brett Musburger and Dick Vitale.
Oh, yeah, good choice.
Vitale told me one time he was assistant coach at Rutgers, and I met him. It was his first year coaching, I think. Well, I had him at a coaches clinic about a year later, and he used to give motivational speeches. And he said to me before he went on, he said, "You want me to cry on stage?" He said, "I can do that." That's what he did. That was his act, a motivational speaker, and he'd bring the crowd to their feet because he'd be up there. "I love this game," and he'd start crying. So
he coached the Pistons for a while, if I recall.
Yes, he did. He did.
Another one I couldn't stand was Harry Carey. I thought he was an incredible phony.
I think he had to come from the Midwest to appreciate him. I think.
As a Pirate fan, what did you think of the gunner, Mr. Prince?
He was a homer. They used to give all the Pirate players nicknames, and he had his stock phrases, but when they try to translate him, I think ABC was doing baseball for a while back then, and they tried to transfer him into a TV role. He couldn't do it. He couldn't handle it.
Alan, I lived out in Pittsburgh for about 2 years, and I remember listening to the Pirates broadcast, with the gunner, and his sidekick was Nellie King. If you'll remember, Nellie King, I think, was a really good pitcher, I believe, with the Pirates, but gave a lot of insight as far as color. But Prince, he would be out there pontificating, and you talk about being a homer. No question, he was a homer.
Well, Carey was as well. Unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, he would.
Style. Wasn't that the style in those days?
Yep.
Except for that's what got Mel Allen fired from the Yankees, because he finally broke down after the Dodgers beat the Yankees in '63, and he didn't hold up under that, and they let him go. But in other markets like Chicago or Milwaukee or St. Louis, that wouldn't have affected them at all, because they were all homers in those markets. What's his name? Bud. The White Sox. What's his name? The good guys and the bad guys. Harrelson. Hawk Harrelson. Yeah. He's one of the worst homers of all. And he's been in there for years.
Yeah, they love it in the Midwest.
And you should point out, today is the birthday, I'm not sure how old he is, today is the birthday of one of the best broadcasters in baseball, Bob Uecker.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. He's 87,
funny.
I think.
He's a funny guy, I tell you. He is hilarious.
He is.
I have that story about, you guys have heard it too, I think. They were talking about knuckleball pitchers, and Uecker said, "Oh, I know how to catch a knuckleball pitcher." He said, "I just wait till the ball stops rolling, then I pick it up."
Yeah.
He and Phil Rizzuto had the two funniest Hall of Fame speeches.
Right.
Okay. George, would you tell me about Harry Callis? Because in all my years of listening, I can't remember him. We get Philadelphia from New York on the radio, but I just don't remember. Was he a lot? Who's he a lot like?
Well, I'll tell you what, with Harry Callis, he probably has more people remember him because of NFL films. he did the voiceover for NFL films. He succeeded a guy named John Facenda, and Harry Callis was a legendary broadcaster. And actually, I didn't know it. He started out in Hawaii. My dad was managing Islanders out there in 1965, and Harry Callis told me afterwards, a few years later, he said, by the way, George, he said, I knew your dad. Your dad used to help me, discuss baseball strategy and that kind of stuff when I was in the broadcast booth for the Islanders. And then when Harry left, it was either before or after Al Michaels of ABC, with his hockey broadcast, Do You Believe in Miracles? Al was there with Hawaii as well. So, but Harry Callis was a great announcer, had a terrific color guy with him in Richie Ashburn with doing the Phillies games, and Harry had a great voice, and his trademark, when somebody hit a home run, it'd be, it's out of here, and he'd always say that, and that's where he became so well known and beloved in the Philadelphia area. But if you ever, watch NFL films, the last few years, Harry Callis, again, was the voice of NFL films, and you'd hear his very distinctive, gravelly voice talking about what was going on the football field.
Hey, George, did your family go over to Hawaii when you were a kid?
Yeah, my mother and my sister did, Ralph. I didn't. I was working at the time, so I never went. But they were there for 2 years and had a very enjoyable time. They loved it. They would come back to Pennsylvania at the end of baseball season. But the Hawaii job back then, it was difficult. Not living in Hawaii, but the road trips. They'd be on about a 3-week road trip up and down in airplanes, and that was a tough life. And my dad was in his 50s, early 60s at the time, and he just told me, he says, I just couldn't take any more plane travel.
Yeah.
Who could blame him?
Right.
Yeah, well, back then, and people talk about minor leagues. I mean, you try to get your minor league, your AAA franchise or whatever, as close as you can to the parent club. But here, my dad is coaching in Hawaii, and the parent club is in Washington, D.C. So you can imagine what kind of trip that is from one end of the United States to the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
I'm going to ask another question. Were you guys ever tempted in life, and this doesn't have to be sports stuff, to relocate to a different region? Start with you, Al Blumkin. You went to Pittsburgh
my parents lived for the last 25, 26 years of their lives in Dallas. I could have easily... Yeah, my father had to take a job out of there, and I went there an awful lot. I went there at least once a year, twice a year, and I could have taken over their condo down there, except for the fact I was working full time.
Okay.
I didn't want to give up the years I spent with the Transit Authority, because I had to get enough time in to get my pension.
Right.
And now, being stuck here because of the pandemic and a few other things, I wish I got out of here years ago.
Okay. George, I mean, you were on the East Coast, and you've seen all of it. I picture in my mind you going from state to state and up to the Poconos and what have you, and with the radio on in the car, listening to all these different announcers as you crossed over. Have you ever considered in your life going anywhere else but the East Coast?
It's interesting, Ralph, because I've lived in the East Coast all my life, and I love history, and living in Bucks County, there's so much history where our country really started, Philadelphia, the Declaration of Independence and all that. So I've always enjoyed the East Coast, but my preference, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the broadcast, I've always loved New England. And New England in the wintertime is brutal unless you're a skier. But the summers in New England, and we have a place right on a little pond, and I love to fish, and it's just such a quiet, pristine life. There's no pollution, there's no noise, and that's what I enjoy. And I've been all over the country. I've also been into Europe, and I prefer living on the East Coast. I'm not a southern person. A lot of people like the South, but to me it just is brutally hot in the summertime. Seattle, I really enjoyed Seattle. I went out there a couple different times, and I remember being out there, and it was gorgeous. And I said to one of the people from Seattle, I said, geez, I said, I thought it rains. I said, I thought the weather up here is so bad. He said, oh, that's what we tell people. We don't want them to come and stay here. I said, that's pretty good, because you're the PR aspect of, where you want to live. And if everybody tells you how miserable the weather is, you say, I don't want to live there. But as it turned out, Seattle was absolutely gorgeous.
Okay. David, you did make the move. What was that like, moving from New York to Virginia?
Oh, well, I had relatives down here, so it was no big deal. My wife and I got married, and then we both moved down here. Given our druthers, as you were asking, we'd love to relocate to England, but we probably will not. We love England. We love where we lived in England, and every time we think about going over to Europe for vacation, we always wind up in England, particularly Cornwall. We're very much enamored with the Cornish attitude, food. We don't know any of the language, but the fact that it's right there on the water off the North Sea and the English Channel, it's just a great place. We probably wouldn't move there, but we'd move somewhere close to where we lived in the Henley area, right outside of Reading, England, which has become
David, you mentioned England and London and all that, and the Cornwall. I loved England. I've been there a few times and been out to Bath and up into the Scottish Highlands and all. Mm-hmm. The only problem I have with England is, and I just cannot get it in my head, is that damn driving on the other side of the road. I
knew you were going to say that, George.
I can't tell you how many times I almost killed my wife and myself by you're so used to driving one way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the what they call the roundabouts. We call them traffic circles, and you're looking the wrong way, and here comes the damn truck and is going to kill you.
That's right. Yeah. It's true. But the secret is you always make sure that you are, while you and the steering wheel are in the center of the road. Seriously, because that's how it is in the States here too. If you think about it, when you're driving in the States, the wheel is on the left. But if you look out the window, you're at the center of the road. If it's a 2-lane road, you're always at the center. So you have to think of it just in reverse. I only got in trouble once.
That's a good point, David. David, that's a very good point. I can remember the first time I went over there, and I don't want to keep dominating this conversation, but I get to I think it was Heathrow or Gatwick, whatever. We rented a car, and it took me probably 15 minutes to figure out how to get the doggone gear shift to go because it was all on the opposite side.
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the only time I made a mistake, believe it or not, was when we came back for home leave, and I took an exit off the LIE and under the underpass, and I got in the oncoming lane. But I quickly corrected that as the traffic was coming.
I hope you did, David. That's not a good thing.
Yeah, no.
I ran into. I went to the Bahamas a couple of times in the 70s. And I saw that. I said, I can't drive here because, with me, driving became automatic.
Right.
You're physically attuned to, make a left turn, a right turn, wherever. And it just boggled me how I never drove down there. I always took cabs, if I had to go somewhere down there.
Right.
But
well, the biggest problem we had was when we took our English car, which had a right-hand drive, over to France, which was driving again on the wrong side of the road.
Right. You know what, hey David, I was going to mention that we went to the Isle of Jersey, I think it is. It's in the English Channel, and you drive on the left-hand side. But to get back, we were going to France, and then it switches back to the American side. So, and what you're talking about, here you are, you're driving an English car, and yet now you're driving on the side of the road what you're used to, but all the instrumentation is the other way. So.
I know. That was a fun trip.
Okay. Hey, Hal, I know you never wanted to live out in New York, and my God, I can't blame you. The life you've had. Where do you vacation, if you do?
Where do I vacation? I vacation in Maryland with my children. No, I was very jealous of George's description of Hawaii. We went to Hawaii. We've gone to Hawaii a couple of times. And I remember the first time we went there, we were just blown away by the beauty of the island. And we were in Maui, I think. And just blown away by the whole thing. And I turned to my wife and I said, let's call Richard, my son, tell him to sell everything and we'll stay here. And she said, you're nuts, And I am. And you know where else I loved? I don't know if you guys have ever been there. Key West is beautiful.
Oh, yes.
I love Key West.
But I heard it's become so commercial that it's lost all of its charm.
I haven't been there in many years, so I can't say about current conditions. But
you were right though. Absolutely, Hal. Absolutely, wonderful place. Especially if you drive it, then you realize the remoteness of the place when you have to drive over all of those little keys and narrow 2-lane highway. Yeah, it's a great place. It is a terrific place to be. But somebody told me there's McDonald's there now, and there's all sorts of all the fast food places are there, which weren't there. It's too bad.
Yeah. But hey guys, time's getting away. I want to thank you for a wonderful show. I love getting to know you guys, even if it isn't around sports. And this was nice for me.
So, you didn't tell us where you'd like to live besides Alameda.
There is no place I'd like to live besides Alameda.
He likes that moat, David.
Well, the moat is to Oakland, and that's my own personal joke. But
he gets paid by the Alameda Chamber of Commerce to make this.
I wish somebody would pay me. All right, guys, this was terrific. We'll do it again next month, same time, 1 week earlier. How about that?
Okay.
That's an inside joke to all you guys from last week.
Hey, Ralph, just set your alarm clock, Ralph.
The funny part is I got a new phone. I thought I had said it properly, and I didn't. I don't blame it on technology. I blame it on the person who set the technology. So if they say it's a smartphone, it's only a smartphone for smart people. So we're limited by being human. How about that? Thank you, guys. David Hubler. David Hubler, George Case III, Alan Blumkin, and Harold Bock Sr.
That's me.
Thanks,
Yep.
Thanks, guys. Stay healthy.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the happiest little Jewish kid in the whole world. See you soon.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.